being a historian is a lot of fun at times.
Really,
figuring out what happened is what we do, right? And we as teachers of history have to be able to share that with our students.
Yeah, that sense of mystery about it, right?
And so we have to present them with, sort of discovery, these kind of discovery lessons.
Yeah.
So as a conclusion to this special episode of On Top of the World History, partnership with Fiveable, and again, if you like what we're doing here, we have a podcast. The link is in the description below. It's called On Top of the World History, where we talk about, history books we've read, lesson ideas. We have discussions on topics relating to world history. If you're a fan of world history, a student, and especially a teacher, we'd love to have you as a listener. It's free, so check it out.
And follow us on Twitter.
Sure.
We're at Pod History. We have a Facebook page.
We have Facebook page.
Facebook page. What is that one? I forget now.
It's just if you search On Top of the World History podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah.
So if we wanted to do a bigger project with students, Dave, working on as perhaps part of a 2 or 3 day lesson where we looked at the first 2 documents we showed as the first day, and then we wanted to do a lesson where we really spent the whole block working with students on some long documents. Walk me through an example of that.
So as far as doing a little bit more elaborate stuff with primary sources, I mean, there's a number of directions people can take this. One thing I've developed in my college level courses is a kind of meatier version of the DBQ. So bringing together, say, 9 or 10 documents, slightly longer excerpts, a little more involved that way. And I found those really, really useful. The one I want to talk about here, though, is an exercise I've used in my class on the Opium War. And the Opium War really, I think, is one of those moments that it's such a pivotal time in history. And this goes back to Pomerantz. It goes back to the Great Divergence. There is a moment from somewhere between the late 18th century and the middle of the 19th century where China really goes from global superpower to global has-been. I don't know. Again, it's just such a dramatic power shift in such a short period of time. And I find it one way to get at this with students is to use primary sources to kind of give them a sense of how dramatic this shift was. And what I tend to do is I built an exercise around 5 different documents. These 5 documents, they basically, 2 of them are primary sources. I'm going to focus on those, I think, for now.
Yeah.
The first one is the letter to George III by the Qianlong Emperor. So he is the leader of the Qing dynasty. He ruled, I believe, it was something obscene, right? Like 60 years, or he was in charge for a long time.
Yes, he was.
He was, throughout that period, he oversaw a period of Qing dynasty expansion throughout Central Asia.
Conquer Mongolia, Tibet as well, or was that already part of it? Anyway, unimportant.
I believe so. But this is, again, as context, China is a major global power, without a doubt, one of the most powerful nations on the planet.
It's the most populous, richest empire at this point in time.
And he's sending a letter here to George III. And
never
George
heard
III,
of that guy before.
King of England, right? The king of the Britons. He's
from the musical Hamilton, Dave.
Oh. You see, I haven't seen Hamilton yet. I feel like I'm the only person who hasn't.
Who has seen Hamilton? You need like $2,000. Anyway, we're getting way off track. All right, so the Chinese emperor writes to George III.
Yeah, and it's an incredible document. And we have copies of it, right? So we can show the students a sort of primary source version of this letter. And what's fascinating about it is really the tone for me. And the tone comes out really clearly throughout the document. I believe it's 4 or 5 pages long in total, but we can kind
Just
of
looking
pick
at
out
the first sentence, right? Your humble desire to partake in the benefits of our civilization, right? You come to pay your respects on the anniversary of my birthday, right? Students will pick up on this.
There's no question. There's no question who the baller is in this situation. It's the Qianlong Emperor. And there's a great quote later on when he sort of says, like, thanks for all the gifts. They're really great. But yeah, we're good. We're good. We have no need for your manufactures, which may as well be tattooed on every world historian's arm, because that phrase, it's being said right at the moment that the Industrial Revolution is beginning in the British Isles. And here you have the Emperor of China speaking directly to the King of England saying, we're good. Nah. And it's a fascinating moment, because it really does hammer home, I think, to students, and tone is such an important part of this, the contingencies of the past, right? That there isn't anything in here that you can look at and say, oh, the Qianlong Emperor saw that there was a major global power shift about to happen. This letter is completely unapologetically, it's arrogant, it's cocky, it's all the things that the British are going to become around much of the world in a very short period of time. And yeah, for me, this document really gives an excellent viewpoint of how the world looked right as the Industrial Revolution was beginning to happen.
And one of the great things that Dave has done there in his description, right, that you can do with your students of this document, right, is they can take things like the understanding and the tone, right, to really get sourcing, right? So we can, when you teach them about this contingent moment when the Chinese superpower is flipped on its head, right, around after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the Great Divergence and all that, then they can use that outside information, something they already know, to say, hey, we can tell the king is saying this, right, because he is the power right now. We can periodize this as this document was written before Europeans show up with their really powerful gunboats, right? The Chinese might have been like, maybe their maritime technology is a little ahead of us right now, but it's not really that important, right? We're a land empire. We don't give a shit.
Yeah. And this, again, it's really, really useful, I think, for the students at conveying to them this sense that the British are the supplicants here. The British, in what the Qianlong Emperor describes, the British are asking for special status and trade, a trade relationship, basically, with China. And the emperor is kind of just rejecting it. Now, again, for the deeper dive, again, part of how China conducted its diplomacy was a lot of trade was actually giving massive gifts or tribute that was then exchanged for another massive load of other goods or reciprocal gifts from the emperor. But for the British, that didn't really align with their expectations, so they're not going to end up really getting that. And so, again, for me, there's this clash of cultures. The British don't really know how to approach the Chinese, don't really understand the Chinese.
It's such a great document,
setup,
right? Because, and this is one of the reasons why it's so important to really teach these kind of long-term understandings of history, right? Is one of the things students learn in AP World History, right, is about the Chinese tribute system, and it evolves and it's very different at different times, but it does have some continuity to it, right? And it's something that students would learn about from a much earlier time. #SaveAPWorld. So
And this, okay. And so, for me, these are the main things that I kind of want the students to grasp with this. One of the other things I do with this exercise, and when I'm presenting the full 5 documents, I have this letter, I have a biography of Lin Shu, I have a little description of the Nemesis, one of the gunboats that's going to sail to China. Then I have the Nanjing Treaty, which represents kind of the end of the Opium War.
Unequal treaties.
One of the most important unequal treaties, and then I have a little summary of the Taiping Civil War that's going to take place after that. And one of the things I ask the students to do is I ask them to put those documents in order. And that's it, right? But these documents, especially with the secondary sources, don't necessarily have a single date that's there, that this fits in here, this fits in there. And one thing that I think we should do more of as instructors at times is just have them do really simple, basic things like put these documents in order, create a narrative out of either these primary sources or out of these snippets of events. And it's so important for contextualization. It's so important for being able to do that. You need to have a good sense of chronology. You can't do causation without this type of thing. And as the students read those documents, they can begin to put together this narrative of China as a respected, powerful global empire, China struggling with the British over the opium trade, the Nemesis arriving as kind of the culmination of British industrial technology at that time, the Nanjing Treaty representing the effectiveness of that tech, and then the Taiping Civil War representing the consequences longer term of this very broadly felt collapse in the aftermath of this unequal treaty.
Well, Dave, I want to say this is a great example of a lesson, sort of trying to take 5 documents, right, that have a stronger narrative connection, and having students create that narrative by just periodizing them themselves is really useful. And this is a great, I'm guessing you have them do this in groups. This is a great activity where teachers can sort of walk around, monitor the classroom, correct misunderstandings.
And that's the big
check
thing.
in
That's
with
the
the
big
groups
thing.
that you know are going to have a little struggle with some of the basic stuff. Push those students who are operating at a little higher level for this skill.
Yeah, and it's for me, combining elements of all these different documents and being able to use that in these skills of, say, causation or sort of, what's the thematic learning objectives or something? Is that the phrasing that the AP program uses? But using those elements, I think, is really important. For the purposes of this, I think what I'll do is just go directly to the other primary source, which is the Treaty of Nanjing. But yeah, okay, so you've already found text of this courtesy of UCLA.
Right. And you can see that, and this is a document that's going to take students much longer to read than some of the ones we looked at earlier, but getting through it, they notice, everything is China's fault, right? That China has to pay tons of money, really do some deference, pay taxes, and hand over these treaty ports, open up trade. It's all one-sided, right? Hence, unequal treaty.
Yeah, and these articles, I kind of, when I'm talking to the groups, especially if they've figured out some of the basics, then I kind of take them through some of the specific articles that I think are most important, and try and convey that to them. And extraterritoriality, I mean, that is such a humiliating type of thing. It was funny. I had one student compare it to living with his family in like Saudi Arabia or something, and I was like, "Oh, that's a little too on the nose there." Like, because there's a different set of laws, though, right? And in this case, I think that is one of the most humiliating aspects of this. That the the Chinese laws basically don't apply to British subjects who are living in these treaty ports. The cessation of Hong Kong to Great Britain, again, obviously so important. That'll become, again, its own basically a location for the British to continue to dominate trade and dominate the coast militarily, paying all these indemnities. That's one of the things that I really like to emphasize to the students was the importance of debt to keeping the Qing dynasty crippled, and the way the British were very explicit in doing that, that they deliberately were asking for more money than China could possibly pay, in with the hopes that that constant debt would give them leverage over the Qing dynasty, and which led to the rather bizarre situation where they fought against a rebellion against the Qing Empire while they were at war with the Qing Empire. It's weird.
We gotta prop up our little indebted debtor regime that we've made. So I think this is a great example of a way to really teach content while practicing those skills of document analysis, of periodization, of contextualization. Something we mentioned earlier, right, is that students can take to really source a document, right, they need to take something that's outside of the information of that document. And occasionally, right, the question, as you've set it up, right, if you have the Treaty of Nanjing and you can compare it to, for example, the letter from the Qianlong Emperor to George III, right, and compare those tones, right, that's a chance to do sourcing, right? As long as the students can talk about the changes that happened in the middle, right, the Industrial Revolution and the defeat of the Chinese in the Opium Wars, then there you go.